Hello and welcome to Inside Events, an international podcast focused on the contemporary issues in events and festivals. This week, I'm joined by Niki Couture, Dr. Niki Couture from the University of Sunderland in London. And we're going to be talking about environmental sustainability. Welcome, Niki. If you could just tell us a little bit more about who you are, what organization you work for, and why you are interested in that concept of environmental sustainability.
Hello, Mike. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss this important concept. As you mentioned, my name is Niki Couture, and I work for the University of Sunderland in London as a principal lecturer in research and knowledge exchange. Prior to this, I was a program leader for sport management at the universities of Bournemouth and Kent in the United Kingdom. And also, I was fortunate enough to work for the London 2012 Games as a fleet scheduler and volunteer coordinator at the Transport Department. My research expertise actually mainly focuses on the interrogation of sustainable sport and physical activity programs, sport, physical activity and civil society and volunteering sustainability, and also the interrogation of the social legacies of the Olympic Games and other major sport events, such as, for example, sport participation and volunteering. In recent years, actually, my research focus has shifted slightly to include also the environmental dimension because I learned more about the climate crisis and how perhaps the events industry could be more attuned to the global sustainability challenges and focus on developing solutions to address these issues. I was and still am involved with several pan-European projects that are funded by Erasmus Plus Sport of the European Union. And these are actually aimed to devise solutions for the sports sector and the sport event sector in particular to be more sustainable. For example, with Play Green, that was a project that was also endorsed by UEFA. We aim to devise solutions and equip sport organization professionals, in particular those that work for football associations, to develop more green sport events, particularly in the grassroots sports sector, and also to learn more about the concept of environmental sustainability and how it applies to their day-to-day operations. Now I'm also involved in two projects that one is called Be Active for Greener Sports and the other is Change, which actually are looking into sustainability more holistically, and they are trying to find ways to equip the sports sector across various disciplines and across the European Union on ways to make their operations more sustainable and also the events that they run more sustainable in the future. And finally, my research is also looking at how we can use events as platforms for encouraging and cultivating pro-environmental behaviors, particularly by utilizing and giving opportunities to stakeholders such as volunteers to be agents of change and learn about sustainable practices while they work in the events industry.
That's great. That's very comprehensive. Thanks, Niki. I was going to say that just environmental sustainability is not something that I specifically focus on in my work, but I'm kind of aware, just being part of festivals and being kind of working with festivals, that there's some really cool innovations that are going on, like biodegradable tents, obviously kind of reducing kind of consumption of plastic, reducing energy costs, et cetera, et cetera. Like, if you could break down the concept of environmental sustainability for us, just imagine you're a first year student and you're like, wow, I care about the environment, I care about sustainability. Events and festivals can be horrible when it comes to thinking about these things because we engage in more hedonic forms of behavior. We don't want to think about critical consumption too much when we're engaging in hedonism, right? And there's a real reticence to do that. How would you describe or kind of deconstruct the concept of environmental sustainability, Niki?
Yeah, I think I would start with defining sustainability, which is, according to the United Nations as well, is defined as the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And much of the focus on sustainability has been placed on the environment and the conservation of natural resources. But for us, it is important to think and know that the environment is just one part of the three-pronged approach to sustainability, which also involves the economic and social well-being. So the bottom line is a concept that has frequently used in order to describe this interrelationship along the three pillars of sustainability. And also this concept actually posits that organizations, firms in every industry, they need to go beyond looking on their financial performance and generating profit, but also finding ways to be more to commit to environmental and social impacts in order to be more attuned to what global communities require these days. And in general, sustainable practices mean that we need to make more balanced decisions and practices that balance all these environmental, social, and economic considerations in order to ensure a more equitable and stable future for all living beings on Earth. Also, sustainable practices in general aim to minimize the negative impacts on the environment, preserve natural resources, promote long-term social well-being, and foster economic prosperity in a way that could be maintained in the long term. Now, for the events industry, particularly in terms of environmental sustainability, it means that we need to adopt strategies and measures to ensure that events are conducted in a more eco-friendly manner, reducing the amount of resources used, the amount of waste produced, recycling and reusing materials whenever possible, and also to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are produced by the event. But this is not only during the event itself, but across its entire life cycle. For example, from the planning stage to the execution, post-event evaluation, and legacies. Also, and this interlinks with the other pillars of sustainability, is also about maximizing positive impacts, such as raising environmental awareness, nature conservation, leading to more healthy and prosperous communities, and also using events to focus on urban renewal. We know that as an industry, we are very diverse. Events are quite diverse in terms of their nature, focus, location, and impacts. And as such, also their environmental impacts are quite diverse. But some of the areas that we have seen the largest impact that events could create relate, for example, with energy use and energy consumption, resource consumption as well, also transport and traffic that perhaps leads to air pollution, but also the increased crowds of attendees that lead to litter and waste. Nowadays, fortunately, we have numerous technological solutions and advancements that could help event organizers to address these issues and run events that are more sustainable. For example, by helping them to measure, manage, and report on their environmental impacts. And a good example of this is the London 2012 Games. That was one of the first events that committed to measure their carbon footprint over the entire project term. But also they managed to create sustainable venues, and they reduced the amount of water and waste that it was produced during the event's life cycle. And also they used some certification systems for sustainable events management in order to make sure that they meet these benchmark standards for sustainability. And this is called ISO 2012-1, that was the first event that actually used this certification system. And since then, and over the last 10 years, other major event organizations have embraced the concept of sustainability in their events. And nowadays, especially the Olympic Games, require all candidate cities and perhaps event organizations to consider about how to embrace sustainability structures in their Olympic Games bidding and preparation. However, other event owners and organizations are perhaps more restrained. They propose low impact activities and ones that they don't have much impact in terms of environmental sustainability. So that means as an industry, we need to still build consensus. We need to find ways to work better together, to take a proactive role, and also for organizing committees and host communities to take an integral role in devising policies and strategies on environmental sustainability, and also recognizing at the same time that sustainability is interrelated. It has these three dimensions that should be equally addressed in order not only to ensure the sustainable development of events, but also the overall sustainable development of communities.
That was great. Well, thanks, Niki. I was writing down questions as you were going, and then you were answering them. So, in terms of the question of nuclear, you might just say it. I'll pass on this question, but is there any questions about the role that nuclear is playing in potential solutions for reducing energy, for tackling the energy requirements of events and festivals, or anything like that, or is it not got to that point yet?
I think we have seen that with major technological advancements nowadays, there is also opportunities for the events industry to use more renewable energy sources, such as, for example, hydrogen or solar power. And I think because of the advancements in terms of regulatory pressures and mandatory requirements for certain certifications, I think the events industry later on will see that we need to find ways to adapt and also to implement these measures in how we conduct events in the future. I think the most important is that perhaps we don't collaborate much with scientists. At the moment, I think nowadays, especially, we have seen major advancements in the big events, in the mega events, but not so much in other more, let's say, regular events that are happening year on year. So perhaps the most important is that we need to consider the science out there, how, for example, to implement these solutions, and how perhaps to also embed these sustainability strategies in our event planning and strategies.
That's really useful. Yeah, and when we think about the role of the UN SDGs and the ISO 2012-1, the Sustainable Event Management International Standard, have we seen that we've shifted the dial? Have these things actually been useful, and have they made obvious gains in the events and sports industry, for example?
I think yes, they have started, for example, with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Now there is an increased focus on processes and action plans across various industries and across the global communities in order to take action and consider the Sustainable Development Goals. I think the main issue is that there is not enforcement in terms of actually applying these principles to every industry. But there is much more focus and emphasis on how these issues are important and why we need to take them into account. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of our footprint on the planet and why it is important that we consider sustainability more holistically, but also environmental sustainability in this case. And it is also important that perhaps with these discussions, it brings all these issues on the table. It makes them contemporary. And we see that, for example, it's not only about ourselves as an industry to reduce our negative impacts, but also to think about how in the future we will be affected by climate change. And this is perhaps something that we don't consider at the moment, and we don't take action in order to devise policies and strategies that will make events future-proof for all these climate effects in the future.
That's a great point. And if we think to the future, what kind of future trends would you say, Niki, that we should really look out for in terms of environmental sustainability?
I think one of the biggest trends, and we have seen with recent policies around the world in terms of reducing carbon emissions or achieving carbon neutrality, such as, for example, the UK government's policy on net zero by 2050. I think it will be one of the key issues that will apply to the events industry as well, how to minimize our carbon emissions and perhaps finding ways to offset these carbon emissions, for example, through tree planting or more serious investment on renewable energies. But also perhaps we will see the industry actually moving beyond this carbon neutrality and trying to deliver a net positive impact on the environment. And perhaps this could happen perhaps with investment in carbon capture technologies or through reforestation projects. And one good example that has actually started to implement that is the Los Angeles 2028 Games, that they are actually set out to deliver the first energy positive games to date. And they are setting out to do that by investing, for example, in renewable energies or committing that they are not going to construct new facilities. They are going to rely only on temporary or existing facilities. Also, perhaps we will see a lot more events that commit to zero waste outcomes and event organizers aiming to minimize waste generation and strive for zero waste outcomes. And perhaps this would mean that they will focus on compostable or reusable materials or encouraging waste separation, recycling, and even to consider the whole supply chain and working with vendors and suppliers that are also committed to waste reduction. In addition, we have seen in recent years with COVID the emergence of virtual and hybrid events, and perhaps these are here to stay and will also help us in perhaps in these environmental sustainability efforts, because not only they help in reducing carbon emissions for the events industry or perhaps reducing costs in terms of travel, accommodation and venue requirements, but also perhaps is a way to increase the reach and accessibility of our events. And perhaps also with technology, we have seen that it plays a major part. And in all events nowadays, we have seen that they make use of mobile apps, that it has reduced the need for printing materials. And also it helps event organizers to track sustainability metrics or to measure the environmental impacts of their events, optimize resource consumption. And perhaps in the future, we will see a much more increased use of these renewable energy sources, such as solar power or hydrogen. In the UK, there is a big focus on using this as energy source in the future. And this perhaps will make a huge impact in the event industry as well. Also, another thing that we need to consider is that we are not immune to climate change, and it's not only that we create harm on the environment, we also need to think about, especially for events that are held in the outdoors or events that they involve some physical strain, such as sporting events. So we need to know how to protect the athletes and the participants and everyone involved and keen to follow our event. And therefore, there has been a lot of recent research effort around these areas to think about how to forecast the severity of climate hazards, and also how to enable event planners to actually plan for this kind of impacts, to devise mitigation strategies, and to consider suitable infrastructure that will help the events industry to be more sustainable in the future. Also, maybe because we talked about the dual role that events play, not only in perhaps reducing their environmental impact, but also being platforms to raise awareness. I think we will see more and more events that actually make use of opportunities to actually engage stakeholders, to make sure that they will have opportunities to learn through engagement in events on how to adopt pro-environmental behaviors. And also with this kind of events, perhaps we will see much more positive outcomes. And perhaps the main takeaway to take from this is that in order to achieve all these outcomes and for positive outcomes to occur in this particular effort, is that we need to plan early and to also take more serious consideration and engagement between stakeholders about sustainability, for event organizers to collaborate more closely with industry experts and scientists on environmental sustainability issues, and also to have more transparent communication and perhaps use the help of these environmental NGOs or consultants to give opportunities for serious discussions around sustainability. So I think as the world continues to focus on sustainability issues, this concept is here to stay, and it will continue to expand and evolve in the coming years.
Super. Thank you, Niki. Your responses are always so comprehensive. They're fantastic. I wish I was in your class. We've run out of time. And Niki, I'll ask you to pop together some resources, and I'll send you an email afterwards, just so we can add these underneath this podcast, so people can maybe do some advanced reading if they want to know a little bit more about all the things that you were talking about. But thank you so much for being on Inside Events. It was really, really good to have you on, and I really look forward to having a bit more of a deep delve into maybe some of the specific things that you mentioned. I'm really interested about the UEFA project, Play Green, and that sort of thing. So I think a lot of people would be really interested to have a more detailed conversation about that. So we'll do another one, hopefully, if you're interested.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.